Hi, I'm Jeff Strong. I'm creator of Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention. And I'd like to welcome you to the second video in this series where I explore a little bit more about the calming audio demo that you've been using. I hope you've had a chance to use it up until this point and have seen some good results. Chances are you've turned it on at bedtime and you're falling asleep sooner, or you've played it during a tantrum that your child might have and saw them calm down sooner. Or you've turned it on for yourself and noticed that kind of makes you feel more relaxed and calm. And if you have been, great, keep doing what you're doing. If you haven't had that experience, then I'm going to talk about the number one thing that gets in the way of making this recording work. And that's that it is the volume is too loud. This happens for people who are musicians, or especially drummers, or people who just really appreciate music. They're going to want to turn it up a little bit. And they're going to want to listen to the music because you like listening to music. And that really gets in the way of what this recording is trying to do. We want this recording to play in the background, to stimulate the brain, to help it shift into this relaxed neurological state. So you really don't want to be actively focusing on it. As a matter of fact, if you do something else while this is on, you're going to find that it's more calming for you. So for instance, if you haven't had a real good success listening to it and being calm, turn it down just a little bit. And then when you turn it on, maybe read a book. Allow yourself to put your consciousness somewhere else for a while until you get used to the stimulus, and then you can just have it on in the background. So if for some reason you've had a hard time with it, say your child is kind of bothered by the narration at the beginning, I do hear this once in a while, and that's one of the difficulties with that particular recording. I put the narration on because I wanted to give you an opportunity to understand a little bit where the volume should be. But I also recognize that that can be kind of jarring for some people. If you look below the video today, you'll see a link to another calming audio download that you can use that doesn't have a narration on it. It's a little different recording as well, so try it anyway. Because if you didn't find the first one as calming as you'd like, you might like this one better. It's a little bit different in its approach. Using the same drum, we're using another different instrument on there. We call this other instrument, by the way, on there an ambient instrument track. And that's on there to moderate the rhythms. The drumming by itself can be pretty intense. And for most people, it's fine. Our custom programs just use the drumming because we're tailoring the stimulation particularly for you. But when we have a generalized kind of recording for calm or focus or something, we add this ambient instrument track on to moderate the intensity of the drumming. We also use that as a basis for being able to set the volume more easily, because that drone kind of gives you a place that you can use as a reference point to the right volume for you. Whereas if it's just the drumming goes up and down a little bit. It's pretty sharp. It can be a little more difficult to set the volume for a lot of people. Download this other audio and experiment with this one. Turn it down if you've not seen what you've wanted with the recording, or if you found yourself listening. Experiment with this one, and you'll find that this will be just as calming, if not more so, for you than the other one. And then make a note of how they're different, and maybe let me know what you're experiencing between the two, because they're very different approaches that I'm using here as far as the rhythms go. But I want to talk a little bit about what it means to calm with the fast drumming. You'll notice this drumming is pretty quick. It is mathematically at 8 beats per second. That's a very fast rhythm. Years ago, I had a publisher of music therapy books call me up after hearing about my work. And music therapy as a field has very kind of concrete ideas about what it means to create calm or relaxing music. And the publisher called me up and he said, "So what tempo music are you doing to calm?" And I said 8 beats per second, and he gasped and hung up on me. He couldn't comprehend that I would be playing something that fast. 8 beats per second is a pretty good clip. That's the basis for what I'm doing. And the reason I'm doing 8 beats per second, because that's the speed you want your brain to be in when you're calm. So let me explain this a little bit. What we're doing here is a process called entrainment. And entrainment is a really simple concept. It's the idea that one rhythm synchronizes to another rhythm. They become in direct concert. They'll be oscillating the exact same speed. And what we're doing here with the drumming is we're driving the brain into that speed. And that process is called auditory driving. The idea that an auditory signal can drive the frequencies of the brain. And this 8 beats per second is really important because that's the low end of a state of consciousness called alpha. Now, alpha is a relaxed alert state. It's a state of consciousness where we're outwardly directed, we're aware of our surroundings, and we're engaging in our world around us, but we're also very calm. We're in a place where we're processing sensory information very, very efficiently. We're also more receptive, so we're able to learn more. We're able to be calm. You know, when we're in our normal wakeful consciousness, our brains are going at a much faster tempo in a state called beta. And beta exists between about 13 cycles per second and 30 cycles per second. So it's quite a bit faster than this calm state of alpha. And we're going to have kind of a dysynchronous kind of quality to it. There's activity kind of different throughout parts of the brain depending on what we're processing. When we get into alpha, especially when we entrain to alpha, we've kind of created a predominantly alpha state of consciousness in the brain. That's a basic idea of what's going on in the brain. It's a little more complicated than that, but this gives you kind of an idea of what we mean when we talk about entrainment, because entrainment is part of our name. Rhythmic entrainment intervention is a therapy that I named early on because I had to for a study I was doing in a school. I didn't, at the time I thought that that's what was going on, the basis for everything that we were doing. Actually, it was just me, so it wasn't we, it was I. I was the only looking at traditional techniques, and I was trying to see if there was something about them that could be used in a broader scope, taken out of their regular cultural kind of influences. And so I stripped away all the cultural trappings that were part of what I had been learning through 10 years of ethnomusicological research and wanted to look at this clinically. And as I was doing that, I had these ideas that, okay, well, I'm playing at these tempos that are really about getting the brain into this calm state. There's research out there showing that the brain does synchronize to an auditory stimulus, especially drumming, and it is a direct correlation. So if I play at 8 beats per second, the brain will become 8 beats per second. And knowing that that was a really good place to be, as well as knowing that that's a comfortable tempo to play and listen to, that's where I started. And so everything kind of revolved around this idea of synchronization, of entrainment. And so that became the basis. And that's why I said earlier in the last video, we started with calm. And calm is really the basis for everything we do with our programs, because the idea of entrainment, bringing the brain to a relaxed state where it can process sensory information, take in sensory information in a way that is most efficient, then we've kind of opened the door for all kinds of possibilities. So the basis for this is this tempo, but it's more than just that. So for instance, if I were to play just the 8 beats per second, straight up, no inflections in the music, you're going to find that kind of annoying. And I'm going to do that just for a second so you can see what this feels like. So this is 8 beats per second, steady beats. And you can just settle into it and see how it feels compared to what you've been doing with the Calm audio demo. That's kind of annoying, and it may not be annoying yet to listen to it for the 10 seconds I played it, but if this went on for any length of time, it would become hard to listen to. You'd want to shut it out. This is part of what's going on with your brain. Our nervous systems are always looking for novel stimulus. They're always looking to decipher pattern. So for instance, if I'm sitting in a room, and it's a fairly quiet room, and I'm reading a book, and all of a sudden I hear some loud noise outside, I'm going to be keyed into it. I'm going to wonder what's going on. And then, I may recognize it as something I've heard before. Okay, it's a dog barking. So all of a sudden I hear the dog barking, and I recognize right away it's a dog because dogs sound a certain way. And I can say, okay, that's a dog barking. Should I be worried about that? Oh, not really. And go back to my book. If it's my dog and it's barking, I might say, well, I think I need to go check and see what's happening here. Another sound, for instance, maybe the backfire of a car. We don't hear that very often. It sounds a lot like a gunshot. So we're going to be a little bit more keyed into it and wonder, well, is there really something going on here? And then we may hear the car backfire again, or we may hear it speeding off, or the tires, or something like that. And we say, oh, that's just the backfire of a car. Whereas a gunshot, we're going to say, oh, something to be worried about. We're always looking for these reference point for the stimulus we receive. And when a stimulus becomes repetitive, when we've deciphered what it is, we are ready to move on. We can put it aside and say, okay, that's what that is, and I'm going to move on. This drumming rhythm, if this kept going for a long time and we can't put it away and say, okay, I get it, move to the side, it becomes annoying to us. That's how our brains work. We categorize, we determine if it's something that's a threat to our survival or if it's important to us, and we attend to it accordingly. The drumming, when it's this constant pattern, becomes annoying because we can't attenuate it, we can't shut it out. we're going to want to shut it off. So what you do here to create this calm, and you may have noticed this in the calming demo, is the rhythm changes. It's constantly moving. It sounds musical. I create phrases. I'm playing music that is somewhat familiar, but maybe not so much. You may hear some rhythms like this before, but probably not exactly like them. It's going to be variable enough that you can tune it out. And so if I play the same tempo rhythm, and I change the rhythms a little bit, so I'm playing at 8 beats per second, but now I'm adding some accents and some tones and some orchestration to it. It sounds very different. It feels very different. So let me do that for a second. I'm going to play 8 beats per second, maybe a little bit longer than I did the straight ahead beat. And I'll just do accents like I did at the beginning of this video. And it sounds like this. That's the same tempo. All I did was add some bass tones and some slap tones and just some technique, kind of created into kind of the rhythms that I tend to play. And you'll find that it's very different. It's got a very different feel than the straight ahead. This is important because we need the brain to key into it. I'm sure you found it something that you kind of listened to for a second and then you kind of just surrendered into it because you didn't need to listen to what I was playing. Now, if you're a musician, especially if you're a drummer, you may have wanted to understand, well, what is he playing? What is the rhythm he's doing? Have I heard that before? How does he do that? Those may be coming up for you if you're a musician. That's why you need to turn it down a little bit to get the result, because you just really do want it in the background. You want the brain to be able to synchronize to this, and it only synchronizes to it when you've decided that it's not something you need to listen to. So you'll hear it go on, you'll key into it for a minute. After a minute or so, you're not really hearing it. You'll notice that it's there once in a while because the sound will change somehow. I'll play louder, I'll play more intensely, or whatever it is, and your awareness will kind of ebb and flow through the process, and that's what it's designed to do. If you have it too loud and you're listening, that changes the whole dynamic. And that brings me to another point. If I was going to play some rhythms that were somewhat familiar, especially for those of you who are used to drumming music, say I play a traditional rhythm that you would learn if you were studying drumming. Or music, or if you had a particular interest in a certain type of music. This rhythm, for instance, it's called the mambo, by the way, and it's a classic Latin rhythm that all jazz musicians are taught early on because we're taught how to play certain standards, and this is one of the standards we learn, and it sounds like this. It's very familiar to a lot of people. As a matter of fact, in a training program that I have where I teach people how to play drums, I describe this as the most played rhythm in the world. There's nowhere you can go in the world that you're not going to find this particular rhythm. It's going to have a million different names, some variations in the way some of the accents are played or the orchestration. But this pattern of 3-3-2 is really common. 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2, 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-1. That's basically the mambo. This is a really common pattern around the world. And probably if you were to listen to this, and as you listened to it as I played it, you probably had an association with it, because I'm sure you've heard some music, some regular music, songs that you like or don't like that have that pattern. And so all of a sudden now you're going to associate it with that. You're going to be thinking about that particular song you heard at one point, and you're going to be thinking about what you experienced during that time. Which brings me to the whole concept of how is drumming different than regular music? How is it that I can play drumming rhythms that are going to affect the brain on this brainwave level? Whereas if I listen to regular music, I have a whole different experience with it. And that's because the melody and the harmony, the structures in the melody and the harmony in regular music carry us psychologically. We respond to that through association. So we listen to a piece of music, there's certain intervals that might feel good to us because of experience. Some people used to think, researchers actually used to think that our response to interval in the pitch and the differences in pitches in a melody are hardwired into us. And they're not, they're cultural. That's something that we learn culturally from what we're hearing growing up. And so when you hear a song, and you hear a melody and a harmony, you're associating with some other experience that you had at some point in time where you heard that same pattern. And so it's amazing to me that, especially us who get into adulthood, we hear a piece of music that we heard as a teenager or a child, and it means so much, which just takes us back in time. As a matter of fact, there's a whole bunch of research being done right now on Alzheimer's patients where they're listening to music that would have been appropriate or things that they heard in earlier periods in their life, and it's bringing them out of that dementia, even just briefly. There's an association that happens with hearing these songs they heard at another time in their life because there's such strong associations with that. That's the key to regular music. And you can create calm with regular music by following certain rules. And this is what I talked about earlier when I mentioned the publisher of music therapy books being aghast that I would be just playing these fast rhythms, because really when you're looking at the association aspect of music and calm, what we generally look for is slow, sparse, predictable music. We want something that's not going to be jarring to us. We want something that's not going to take a lot of cognitive capacity. So we're going to want something that's fairly slow-moving melody, that doesn't have too much of a complex harmonic content to it, that we can almost predict what's going to happen because there's themes that keep replaying. And that's the key to creating calming music. People will talk about 60 beat per minute music and things like this. It's not the 60 beats per minute that's important. It's the sparse cognitive, the light cognitive load that becomes the important piece. Then there's a piece of association. You'll hear some people talk about, especially people with ADD, that they find heavy metal music calming. And they find it calming because they have associations. They also probably, their brains are moving so fast, the calm for them is enough to chew on. The hardest thing for somebody with ADHD, and I have it, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned it in the previous video, but you'll see it all over our site and some books that I've written. I wrote ADHD for Dummies, and I was diagnosed in college, and I can, if you read my book, Different Drummer, you can see how this all plays into what I'm doing today. But, and I'll probably talk about that next week in the video on focus. But for the point of this video, a lot of people with ADHD, they need that stimulus in order to feel calm, because our brains are running a little differently than everybody else. We need that activity. And so heavy metal music, or for me, jazz music was a real big one. That was the calmingest thing in the world, because there was enough there for my brain to chew on that I could just finally relax. If there's not enough going on, I get tense. I get really uncomfortable. So I can't handle 60 beat per minute music. So if you're going to choose regular music to calm, choose something that you resonate with, that has positive associations with you, that matches your desire for a cognitive load. If you're somebody with ADHD, you're going to need music that has a higher cognitive input than somebody who is just calmer anyway. So look for music that fits for you. If you're choosing calming music for somebody else, you need to really talk with them about what they like, and you need to experiment and see how it works. So, but that's a whole different world. What we're doing here with drumming is affecting the brain wave patterns, and we're bringing the brain into a relaxed neurological state. And this concept and this process is universal. Everybody's brain will entrain given the right stimulus and the right amount of time. So, and what are the right stimulus and right amount of time? Well, you've probably already experienced that listening to the Calm audio demo. You'll probably notice that the first time you listened to that recording, it took a good 10 or 15 minutes before you really settled into it. And now as you listen to it, you can settle in pretty quickly. At this point, you're probably annoyed by the narration because it goes on for a whole minute, and by then you just want to be done. So that's why I recommend downloading this new recording, because we'll skip the narration. You can just jump into the rhythms and see how quickly and how deeply you get. Really, the driving aspect of this drumming is going to shift the brain because the brain wants to shift. And it becomes used to shifting because that's what we do all the time. Entrainment is so common that we don't even notice it exists. And the most common place, and probably universal place and unnoticed place that we're going to find it, is in how we interact with other people. When you sit and you talk with a friend or a family member, and you're getting into a conversation that is meaningful to you, and you're interacting and kind of connecting, your brains are actually synchronizing. They are entraining with each other. And generally you're entraining to alpha, the state of consciousness that the drumming is trying to bring you into. And that's why you can feel so relaxed and so fulfilled. And this dynamic is really important. The same thing's happening with the drumming. We're going to get your brain into alpha as long as you listen to it long enough. And research has shown that it takes anywhere from 12 to 17 minutes the first time. And it progressively is quicker each time you listen to it. And then secondly, that you allow yourself to entrain by creating an environment that is conducive to it. And this is why we recommend turning it on quietly, doing it at bedtime, because you're already going to bed with the intent of calming down. Then you turn the recording on and you've already set yourself up. You've dropped your cognitive load by turning off the lights, turning off other sounds, and you're allowing your brain to just kind of go more idle. It's going to be more receptive to shifting into this entrainment aspect than it would otherwise. Which leads to a question that a lot of people have. Why is it that somebody who's having a tantrum is going to be calmed by this recording, and they're going to be calmed in less than 12 to 17 minutes the first time? A lot of people who've played this for a child having a tantrum, especially a child on the autism or ADHD spectrum having a tantrum, they're going to see that tantrum stop in just a couple of minutes, and usually it's less than that. And the reason for that is because the stimulus is unusual enough that the brain keys into it. And I could go into real great detail about what happens when anxiety takes over. And when you have an anxiety-based behavior like a tantrum or an anxiety attack, you're in a loop, and you need to be pulled out of that loop. And the best way to pull out of that loop is to give it a novel, unpredictable stimulus. And for most people, fast drumming, constantly changing, is both novel and unpredictable. And so all of a sudden, the nervous system keys into what's this new thing different here, and then it's able to let go of what was causing the problem. And now that transition can take a little while, and then as well, you've got the drumming happening with this tempo that's going to entrain, that's going to allow then the brain to shift and the tantrum to end or the panic attack to end. And the more you use this recording, either with the narration or without, the more effective it becomes. And that's the beauty of it. The brain learns how to synchronize with this. Now there might be a point where it becomes so familiar that it doesn't work the same. That's where our custom program comes in and what we call progressive stimulation. And I'll talk about that at another time. It's really not important for this time because there's no way that you're going to overuse this recording to have it no longer work for you. I mean, it takes a very long time. I've been listening to variations on our calming recordings for, well, the first one I made was my first recording that came out in 1992. So it's been 24 years for me. I'm listening to one of these recordings or another every day. If for no other reason that I'm creating more music. But as well, I like to have it on in the background. I use BrainShift Radio, which is our streaming music site, which is kind of cool because it allows you to choose a category and an intent, and the music will be chosen for you. If you get a chance to try it out, we have a free trial with that. It's very cool. But really at this point, try the new calming recording without the narration. Play around with it a bunch of things. Put it in the car, before bed, try it again on the calm environment, you know, the anxiety-based behaviors that might come up, panic attacks or whatever else. Just kind of mark what's happening. And send me an email. Let me know what's happening with you, any questions you have. I'd like to hear what this is doing for you, observations you have, questions, comments, criticisms, if there's something you don't like about it. You know, some people say, yeah, I really hate that ambient track. Do you have something without it? Sure. Do you have a different ambient track? Try BrainShift Radio. Allows you to mix the music as well. It's very cool. The idea here with the calming and REI, my drumming, is, like I said, playing at about 8 beats per second to bring the brain into a relaxed neurological state. We're doing this through a process called entrainment and auditory driving. The idea that an auditory stimulus can drive the brain. And this technique is ancient. And I can talk about that another time, but for the purpose of this video, keep playing what you're playing. In a couple of days, I'm going to send you another link to a focusing recording, and I'm going to talk about what it means to focus. Like I said earlier, we do two things with REI. One is synchronization, this idea of entrainment, and the other one is stimulation. Stimulation is what we're doing when we're working with other areas that we work with our custom program. This is where our progressive stimulation comes in. When we're dealing with language and socialization and sensory processing and self-stimulatory behaviors and anxiety disorders, they require stimulation more than just the synchronization aspect of calm. But the generalized recordings, like our calming rhythms, for instance, is designed to just be stimulating enough, complex and unpredictable enough to bring the brain into this relaxed neurological state so you can feel what it feels like to be calm. Focus is a little different, and I'll go into detail on that in the next video. In the meantime, please let me know what you're thinking, any comments, questions that you have, and as well, keep playing these recordings. Try the new one without the narration, see how that works for you. And thanks for watching.